I endured years of humiliation as the backbone of the family, but the day they decided to serve me an eviction notice in front of the whole neighborhood at the mural reveal, they stabbed me in the back by staging a public shaming meant to strip me of my home and my legacy. I had been quiet on purpose. That quiet was my shield and my planning room. Secretly, I am the silent protector trustee of the Bennett Fields Heritage Trust and a forensic quiet title attorney, and I was already hours into activating a legal lock they would never see coming. My name is Maya Bennett, and I am 42 years old. Before I reveal exactly how I walked away with everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe toxic people always get what they deserve. But to understand how they ended up with absolutely nothing, we have to go back to the nights, the bills, and the way I learned to build peace out of paperwork. I learned very young that family loves what you do until you stop doing it. I was the daughter who took the bus with grandma's grocery bag, the cousin who kept the calendar for every birthday, the niece who brought pot roast to funerals. When my mother passed, I arranged the funeral and paid for the headstone without fanfare. My cousin Latasha would stand beside me at the gravesite in designer shoes and talk about the future like it was a museum piece she'd one day curate. At the house, our house, the Bennett house, my life was a series of small erasures. Latasha would call me, "Maya, can you just handle the landlord call?" Or, "Maya, you always make yourself available." My response to everyone was the same soft spiritual cadence I learned from my grandmother. "It's okay, baby. We'll get through it." I prayed out loud and typed quietly. I smiled while they critiqued my clothes, and I said yes to lifting heavier burdens than I should have. Nobody in my family knew the real reason I kept my laptop on until 2 in the morning. They thought I was catching up on emails or writing sermons for the church's youth night. The truth is, I was a quiet title forensic attorney by trade, under a pseudonym, and the protector trustee of a trust that had been in our blood for generations. The Bennett Fields Heritage Trust was set up by my great-grandfather in 1919 as a private protective instrument for the land our family and neighbors had operated businesses from. Over decades, it had been designed to shield property from predatory buyers and to provide a reversionary shield if the property was ever threatened by fraudulent transfer. Only one living person could activate the trust's equity lock: me. I kept the title quiet because the world takes notice and wants what it didn't earn. I hid my status because when you are a woman of color with leverage, relatives suddenly believe they have a divine right to access it. I hid it because the family needed to remain intact, or so I told myself while I built a fortress of paperwork into the nights. The double life was exhausting. By day, I was the family's patient anchor, bringing casseroles, holding grandchildren, nodding through insults about my old car or not knowing how to dress. And by night, I was drafting quiet title actions, tracing notarized signatures, running historical chain of title searches, and building an audit trail strong enough to call down the law. I watched Latasha and her husband Tyrone Ty sip brandy at the dining table and talk about branding the house into a boutique rental while they were behind on 2 student loans, a haylock, and a long string of missed car payments. Every one of their offhand remarks was a knot I quietly untied later in a legal brief. They believed religion and gentility were their camouflage. I let them believe it because arrogance makes people fast. There were nights Latasha looked at me with a softness that said, "I'm family." And in that softness, I planted seeds of tolerance. I wanted to be kin in the best sense. I blessed their engagement when they married in the backyard beneath the wisteria my grandmother planted, and I brought the peach cobbler. The only problem was that they mistook my kindness for a blank check. They were loud about taste and quiet about debt. They were obsessed with logos and oblivious to ledgers, and they believed, with a certainty bred from years of people-pleasing, that I would never enforce the legal protections I had built for our home. They assumed the strong black woman would bend again, another favor asked for and given. The day they opted for aggression instead of gratitude was the day they made their biggest miscalculation. Latasha and Ty's plan was, when you boiled it down, a confident scam dressed as family entrepreneurship. They sat in the sunroom with a friend of a friend, an unscrupulous paralegal named Daniel, and plotted to create a caretaker agreement they could use as a cover story. The agreement would be a fake deed and a purported transfer of a life estate in exchange for caretaking fees. They would recruit a notary who would sign off in exchange for cash, create an LLC called Langley Legacy Holdings, and then record a quitclaim deed in the county recorder's office. Once that quitclaim hit the public record, they believed the stigma of the owner left and the public spectacle would carry them to a quick resale or Airbnb flip. But they needed a moment to strike that would guarantee maximum humiliation. They chose the mural reveal. For months, a group of neighbors had been working on a mural at the community center, a piece of art honoring our elders who had built businesses in the block. The mural reveal was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. People would be there, local press might show up, and Latasha knew the social sting of public shame would be their best weapon. Her plan was to storm the stage, hand me an eviction notice prepared by Daniel, and announce to the crowd that I had abandoned the property and sold it to Langley Legacy. It was cruel and theatrical. Latasha and Ty imagined cameras on their faces and sympathetic murmurs from townships who have always thought family fights are about money we all recognize. They did not account for the clauses and the truth I had spent a decade building into the trust or the ledger of history that could be pulled like a thread under them. On paper, their scheme had two parts: forge a series of documents that appeared to transfer interest, and create an emotional performance so ugly that anyone who might question the documents would be pressured to stand down. They thought a loud lie would drown out verification for at least a day, long enough for them to attempt to liquidate or rebrand the property. If their plan had involved simple theft, perhaps it could have been undone compassionately. This was theft with spectacle, and the intent to erase not just a house, but the story of 10 generations. That was why it woke the part of me who does not fold. I discovered the plot by accident, an overheard phone call while picking up paint for the mural. I heard Ty laugh on the other end. "We'll have cameras, a judge will see the paper, and it'll be done." That laugh was the sound of a man convinced the law belonged to performative men, not quiet women who read statutes like prayers. After I heard it, I did not react as they expected. I did not storm the house and scream. I did what I always did. I went home, made coffee, and opened my late-night files. The work of a protector trustee is not made in fury. It is made in method. I had spent 12 years building a very specific armor. Trust clauses that required a reversionary trigger if any transfer appeared without 72 hours notice to the protector, a dormant equity lock clause that converted a title into a restricted status asset if fraud was detected, and a private arbitration clause that could be activated to prevent a fraudulent conveyance until court validated the chain of title. All of these legal instruments were lawyering the way my grandmother used to chain the back door, quiet, practical, and impossible to sway with a stare. At 2:13 a.m., I started the audit that would prepare me for the mural reveal. I logged into the secure account the trust had opened years ago, a community equity account registered under a corporate veil created to shield the trust's activity, and I ran an automated title search across the recorder's indexes. I always ran those checks, but this time I pivoted the search into motion. First, I ordered a historical chain of title pull from Nia Solomon, a title examiner I had worked with when I reclaimed a church lot years back. Nia is precise and kind in that way only people with deep faith are. She texted me at 3:02 a.m. "I see a new quitclaim attempt in process. It's not recorded yet. They used a notary name that last popped in our system 3 counties over." That was the opening I needed. Next, I drafted 3 legal moves in a quick succession, a lis pendens to notify the world that a property interest was in dispute, an emergency ex parte application for a temporary restraining order citing likely fraudulent transfer, and a UCC-1 financing statement directed at Langley Legacy Holdings and all known affiliates, which would ensure any bank attempting to cash out the LLC would see a public notice that the trust had an interest or an issue proceeding. I don't flinch at the word freeze. It is not about cruelty, it's about stopping theft. I called Marcus Reed, an old colleague and an excellent litigator, at 3:40 a.m. "Marcus," I said, "they're trying to cut us out today. I need a bench warrant for an order to freeze any transfer and to get the county recorder to halt recordings under their notary number." His voice was calm. "File it," he said. "I'll support you. Send me the audit." While Marcus drafted the ex parte, I tailored the language of the emergency petition with care. Legal mechanisms can be as spiritual as prayer when you use them to protect legacy. The equity lock clause in the trust was rare. It had to be activated by a written declaration to county authorities, and once activated, it created a statutory-level obstacle to recording any transfer without notarized confirmation from the trustee and a court order. That declaration existed to prevent the exact thing Ty and Latasha planned. It had never been used. The reversionary shield had one seat left, the seat I was about to occupy. I also prepared a quieter, less public arrow. I drafted an NDA and a settlement offer to present as a courtesy if, and only if, they withdrew immediately and agreed to perform a private accounting. That was not because I wanted them close. It was because I wanted the story of our legacy untainted by their desperate sale. The NDA was a test. Sign, and they would enter arbitration under terms favorable to the trust. Refuse, and we went to criminal referral for allegations of forgery and conspiracy to defraud. At 6:12 a.m., I walked the block and sat by the mural, a little way off, watching volunteers hang the last panels. I sat in the same folding chair I'd brought for every community event for 15 years and ordered my posture like a public prayer. I rehearsed what I would say and what I would not say. I breathed and read the petitions that Marcus had filed. By noon, the filings were done. The ex parte motion was filed, and the clerk had given us a hearing time for 3:30 p.m., which conveniently coincided with the mural reveal. Everything in my plan was about timing. The law has teeth if you make the right people aware. I had local counsel, the county recorder on temp notice, a title examiner ready to testify about forged instruments, and most importantly, documents that proved the trust's continuous operation since 1919. There is a different weight to a document that bears the image of a person who died 60 years ago and the signature of a notary with a serial history. I also prepared an audible bomb. I had, a week earlier, recorded a conversation with Daniel, the crooked paralegal, when he tried to bribe a neighbor to sign a false affidavit. He bragged about getting the deed changed and how the woman would never check. In the recording, he said the word quitclaim like it was a magic trick. That recording was admissible evidence of intent to defraud. At 2:52 p.m., I texted Nia, "Stand by at the mural. Bring your binder. Marcus will be arriving with a desk order. I want you to be ready to show chain of title." Her reply, "I'm in my car. I'll be on the microphone if you want me to." She was both a professional and a believer. I liked that in people. I did not tell Latasha or Ty I knew. I let their plan incubate into arrogance. I let them believe that spectacle would win. They would learn that meticulousness beats noise. The mural reveal was as beautiful as I remembered. Kids rapped lines about our elders. There were church banners and fried fish stands and the smell of collard greens wafting across the lawn. Latasha arrived in a blush dress with Ty at her side, and she smiled like a woman about to open the curtains on a stage production. The crowd clapped when Reverend Hart spoke about legacy. The camera from the local paper wheeled in. Everything they wanted for spectacle had come to them. Latasha waited until the applause settled. She approached me in front of the mural purposefully and placed an envelope into my hands. It was heavy, glossy, and smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne. "Maya," she said with a polite, slow smile, "we thought it was time to move on. This is your eviction notice. We've recorded the transfer. We're installing new locks tomorrow." The crowd exhaled a quiet gasp. People who had known me for years saw a paper and assumed that paper carried truth. The neighbor beside me, Mrs. Price, leaned in and asked, "Is that real, Maya?" I held the envelope like a Bible and smelled the paper. I could feel the audience like a tide pressing in. I allowed the moment to be thick. I let them have the pause they wanted. Then very softly I said, "Please read it." Latasha looked startled, as if the prompter had glitched. She read the first line, an investor's name and a date, and then tried to smile through the next. I let Marcus step forward, an official bench slip in his hand, my calm folded into his stance. He announced, "The county has a temporary restraining order. Any attempted transfer or recording under the notary number listed in these alleged documents has been halted. There is a lis pendens on this property. Under the equity lock provision of the Bennett Fields Heritage Trust, any instruments recorded without the trustee's authorization are void until the court rules otherwise." The smile drained from Ty's face the way dusk takes color from a room. He took a step back. Latasha's hand went to her mouth. The murmurs rippled back through the crowd as Nia pushed forward her binder, opened it, and with the kind of voice that comes when someone has seen 1,000 records and knows which are true, she said, "Those signatures were not notarized in this county. The notary number ties to 3 attempted affidavits filed by a paralegal currently under investigation." Then I did the part they might have least expected. I played the recording. Daniel's voice came through the small speaker, loud and casual. "We'll file the quitclaim, then we get the deed sold. She won't run a title search." The sound of his arrogance inside my phone was a sound the crowd could not ignore. People shifted. Faces that had leaned toward gossip pivoted toward the truth. A sheriff's deputy who had been standing a little way off, Marcus had called ahead, stepped forward with a copy of the criminal complaint. The deputy read the counts: forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted unlawful eviction. The deputy informed Latasha and Ty that an order to seize any proceeds from Langley Legacy Holdings was in effect via a UCC filing, and that any attempt to change locks could result in arrest. I did not scream. I did not beg. I stood tall and let the law speak loudly enough to drown the smallness of their scheme. In that quiet, the crowd learned something about me they had not had to learn before. I was not the woman who would always absorb injury. I was a lawyer with the power to shut down a theft before it moved. Ty lunged toward the envelope with a predatory look, a last grasp at narrative control, and the deputy took it from him. Latasha wept openly, and for a second the old kinship memory flared in me, but only for a second. You can mourn a person and still refuse their theft. The camera trained on Ty as an order was read. Langley Legacy Holdings is subject to an immediate freeze. All accounts under that name are enjoined pending a full accounting. Any transfers recorded under the notary number referenced are nullified until adjudicated. You should have seen the way his jaw clenched when his bank account notifications began pinging on his phone. Marcus had coordinated with the banks using the UCC notice and a phone call to the fraud desk. The sound of real-time accounting is a sound that unravels entitlement. Ty's bravado collapsed into stunned, exposed shame. I walked across the lawn to the mural and touched a painted hand that represented my grandmother. The mural was a reminder that legacy is not about title alone. It is about memory and stewardship. This moment was not about crushing souls. It was about restoring an order of reverence that had been breached. "Latasha," I said, "you had the chance to do this privately. You chose spectacle. The law will do the rest." Her pleading was loud, but the legal instruments I had activated left little room for "let's talk." We had asked them privately for an accounting weeks ago and had been met with silence. Mercy can be weaponized by the mercenary, so I let procedural dignity take over. When the local reporter asked for comment, I spoke only 2 sentences. This property has been in our family as part of a trust designed to protect it from predatory transfers. The court will determine the outcome. My priority is protecting the community and my grandmother's work." Then I left the stage, walked past the children painting, and breathed like someone who had reclaimed a prayer. The last thing I did publicly was hand Latasha a non-negotiable document, a draft of an arbitration clause, and an NDA. "Sign this, and we avoid criminal proceedings while we account for every penny," I told her. She tried to sign with a shaking hand. Ty began to sob. They had a choice: sign and live with dignity in a different format, or refuse and face the full force of the law. They hesitated, and in that hesitation, they throttled their own mercy. In the week after the mural reveal, the legal machinery I had engaged moved like a river after spring rains. Langley Legacy Holdings found itself unable to transact. Banks held funds. The county recorder froze any new instruments tied to the suspect notary. The police served subpoenas, and Daniel went on record as cooperating with investigators, turning his bravado into a plea for leniency. That is what greed looks like when it meets consequence. Bargaining. My cousin called and called. She sent messages that read like fragments of a person learning for the first time what accountability is. "Maya, please," one text said. "We didn't think," another said. "I'm sorry. We were wrong." My voicemail box filled with apologies that rang hollow because what they were asking for was a reversal I could not grant in good conscience without securing a true accounting and restitution. There was a day, one late afternoon, when Latasha came by the house, and she stood on the porch and cried. She looked older. Worry had sharpened her face. She said, "Maya, I was raised wrong. I thought bribery was business. I thought being flashy would hide the ledger." She asked me if we could eat together and talk. I agreed to food. I do not refuse kin the table. We sat across from each other. She told me about the pressure Ty felt from old friends and the way debt humps like an unseen animal. She talked about how brand had become currency because the job market had little respect for the sort of work that built community. She wept, and I handed her a napkin and poured tea. But when she asked me to drop the criminal referral, I shook my head. "This isn't about revenge, Latasha," I said. "This is about accountability. You and Ty have to learn how to value what you inherit beyond designer labels. The law is not an instrument of vengeance here. It is our grandmother's instrument of protection." She asked if we could arrange a payment plan if restitution was required. "We will do whatever you require," she said. In truth, I had already foreseen multiple paths forward: arbitration with financial restructuring, community service that involved rebuilding the neighborhood, or, if necessary, criminal restitution. But none of that would erase the learning she needed to do. The public aftermath brought surprising gifts. Partners in the trust reached out. Small business owners who had been in danger of losing storefronts called to say thank you. A church choir requested that we establish a micro-grant program in the trust's name for legacy owners. People who had seen the mural had felt the thread of our history reconnect. Black excellence in this story wasn't about a single woman taking everything. It was about a woman protecting a shared inheritance so that others could breathe easier. And me? I signed the arbitration agreement I had offered to Latasha with a stipulation. She and Ty would enroll in a financial reconciliation program, and they would volunteer time on a rebuild grant I set up with some of the trust's smaller discretionary funds. They would also write a public apology letter to the neighborhood and commit to returning any money illicitly accepted to the trust. She signed. He did not. He wanted to keep his pride. That was the point where I stopped waiting for repentance and began to protect my peace in a different way. I did not move from the house that week. I cleaned. I prayed aloud as my grandmother had taught me softly, the same hymn that had lulled me to sleep as a child, and I reviewed the trust's distributions. I restructured a few provisions, clearer requirements for family members who live in trust property, mandatory educational sessions before any transfer can be considered, and a live notice provision to ensure any attempt to record a document in the county would trigger immediate alerts to first-degree relatives and the trust's counsel. The law was a tool. I sharpened it to prevent this path from being available to anyone else. On a slow Sunday morning, I packed a small overnight bag, kissed the mantel above my grandmother's photograph, and drove away. I did not flee. I left. I left with the property safe, the trust intact, and a new program in place to help family members who need help rather than taking from them or letting them take from others. I drove to a cabin a friend had gifted me, a place with a garden and a quiet creek, and I allowed myself to breathe in a way I had not in 10 years. There is a kind of spiritual healing that comes when you use your power to restore rather than to punish. The community she belonged to, neighbors, the choir, Naya, Marcus, Reverend Hart, came together to help me set up a continuity plan. The trust now funds community classes for estate planning, so other families do not get lured into the same traps. That, to me, is the truest form of generational wealth, knowledge that makes you harder to fool. Latasha and Ty's story did not end neatly. They faced the consequences of their choices. Ty's pride cost him the ability to reconcile immediately. He had to do his learning in a courthouse and a bank of letters. Latasha made a slow pivot. She worked with our community fund to sponsor a street fair and to fund a small arts grant in her grandmother's honor, an attempt to give back the public spectacle she once sought to weaponize. Their debts were restructured, and they performed hours of restorative service. The trust imposed conditions that would prevent immediate future risk. I returned to town a month later for a fundraiser under the mural, and people called out my name with a warmth I had not felt in a while. They did not cheer because someone was punished. They cheered because a legacy was protected and because they had a new safety net. I felt, for the first time in years, allowed to be quietly powerful without being called unkind names for it. When people ask me what revenge felt like, I tell them this: revenge is a child's story, justice is what I sought. The cold, methodical work of protecting what belongs to the community is not drama, it is discipline. It is Black excellence that chooses to hold itself accountable, to teach the next generation to value steadiness over flash, and to make sure that the songs and businesses of our elders are preserved. If you are listening tonight, and you have been the silent backbone, learn to document. Learn to keep receipts. Learn to draft a plan for your piece the way you would build a garden. Plant the legal seedlings now so they will grow when you need shade. Protect your story, because if you don't, someone loud will try to sell it as theirs. I still wake up at 2 a.m. sometimes to check the ledger, partly out of habit and partly out of gratitude. I volunteer for a legal clinic where we teach estate planning to elders who need help, and I spend more time at the mural now, watching children trace painted fingers and learning the names of those painted hands. The house is intact. The trust is intact. My peace is intact. And when Latasha sees me at church now, she no longer looks at me like I owe her anything. She looks at me like a cousin who, once, had to teach her a lesson about honor. That is all I ever wanted. If you found this story helpful, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Protect your peace, sisters. Protect your legacy. Trust is a tool, use it wisely, and do not be afraid to defend what your ancestors fought for.